Welcome, everyone. We're back with another live networking event here on the 17thfloor.com. As a reminder, to those of you that are not part of our beta program yet, which we're doing this live during the community's beta, the 17th Floor is an online community that is focused on the growing practice of human capital management, which gathers all HR, accounting, and payroll professionals together for peer-to-peer engagement, education, and mentorship. Every 2 weeks, we host one of these live networking chats featuring special industry guests in which we and you, our members, can chat about experiences in uplifting businesses by elevating the well-being of our employees. My name is Sam Fiorella. I'm a member of the 17th Floor Community Management Team, and I'll be acting as your moderator in today's chat. Today, we want to talk about caregiving in the workplace and how we can support caregivers. As a caregiver, it can be extremely challenging to find balance between the responsibility of being a caregiver to that person that you are caring for and your work and work expectations. It's crucial for managers to show them the support that they need and adapt their workforce to allow them to find this balance and not feel overwhelmed. And that's a difficult thing to do because as managers, we're responsible for the bottom line of the business, the efficiency of the business. And sometimes we forget that what is happening in an employee's life outside of the office impacts what they do in the office. So as a caregiver who gets support from management, a caregiver who gets support from management is an employee who will ultimately feel valued, but also deliver more. And that's what we want to explore today. How do we do that? And to do so, we've asked Wanda Shreve, who is a principal of work with Wanda Shreve HR Law, Investigation, and ADR Services, to join us as our special guest. With a career spanning over 20 years, Wanda practiced management side labor and employment law at a national firm before holding senior roles in both the private and public sector. So certainly she has the experience here. But today, Wanda provides HR legal advice to employers and conducts independent workplace investigations. She is a mediator and offers training on a variety of workplace topics, such as diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Joining us is Kathryn Hill, who is a seasoned manager and 17th Floor Board of Advisors here in our community, who has an in-depth knowledge and experience in human resources, payroll, benefits, pensions, and investments, share purchases, you name it. Many of you are familiar with Kathryn from her engagement here on the community. And we welcome both of you today, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So before we get into it, a note to all of you listening live, feel free to ask questions. And if you're listening to this as a recording video or podcast afterwards, feel free to either leave questions live in the chat, whether you're listening on LinkedIn or on YouTube. And if you're listening to it as a recording later, feel free to comment in the discussion notes below or on the forum. We want this to be an ongoing conversation where everybody can have their say. So let's just jump into it. I think it's important for many people. I know that when the team introduced this concept to me, I struggled with the term caregiver. I wasn't sure what it meant, and who are we caring for? Often, the first thing we're thinking about is a woman who comes back from maternity leave and has young children at home that she's trying to help, and along with coming back to her career. But it does go much further than that. So can I ask, let's start with you, Wanda. How do we define caregiving today? What is a modern definition of it, and what should we be looking for?
Thanks, Sam, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this very important topic. I'm defining caregiving for the purposes of this conversation, and what I'd like to impart is it's about the informal, unpaid caregiving that family or friends give to people with long-term conditions. And that can be a mental or physical disability or problems related to aging. But it's a very different practice than parenting. So I hope we can explore that more today. But that's the definition that I'd like to use today.
Yeah, I think it's so widespread these days how a family is tackling so many caregiving situations. You've got people with older parents, people with, handicapped children, people with regular, 6 kids in the family. I mean, there's so many pressures on an employee to, keep their family happy, but also keep their employer happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's something as an employer myself, in our company, I've noticed the challenges, but also as a parent I've had children with mental health concerns, and in the past, before I was my own employer, I noticed that there was not a lot of consideration given to what I was going through until a moment of crisis. And then in that moment of crisis, the company really stepped up and encircled me and provided me support. But before that, when the problems were brewing, nobody was asking, and I was never given that opportunity to share what was happening so that potentially I could ask for that support. I just had to take that burden on myself. So how do we, in a sensitive way, maybe is the question, how do we make this a topic that is comfortable for people to talk about? How do we empower or educate managers to not only create the policy, but ask if you're having that kind of a problem, that you can speak to us?
Yeah, this is it's the culture issue, right? And I think it's part of what's weaving through all of the discussions that you're having in this forum, right? It's about having people bring their whole selves to work and feeling comfortable that they can share it. With caregiving, it can be a little different. In my own experience, you didn't mention this, but I've been a caregiver since 1995. I have a mother who has a long-term disability, so I've been caring for her as a worker as well. So this is really personal to me, but it's hard to. It's one thing when it's yourself, but when you're divulging information about another person, it even makes it a little bit more difficult. So as much as we look at, people are okay to talk about challenges with their children, the parenting thing is more acceptable than perhaps the caregiving. So I think as much as we can raise awareness about the struggles, it's something that a lot of us struggle with silently because you don't want that perception of being unavailable to your employer. So forums like this, I think, are a great first step, but it is about that culture of really empowering people to bring their whole selves to work.
I think it's really important for the manager to be able to talk to their employees and just say, how's things going? How's your balance at work and work and home? You don't really have to get into the details, but if you need flexibility, if you've got things on your plate, the door is always open to allow people to be flexible as an employer. And I think, if I get a call from a long-term care home, and there's an issue with my mom, I don't want to sit at the office. I obviously want to get up and go, and I want the employer to know that, whatever happens, I'll do what I have to do to get around that, but I want the flexibility to be able to respond to that situation. I was a designated caregiver to my mom who left us in February of this year at 97. But I can't tell you the number of calls I had from the home saying, oh, she's got an issue. And it's like, okay, I'm sitting at my desk, trying to run payroll. And I'm like, okay, what do I do now? So I being flexible as an employer is key to helping an employee.
Mm. So one of the things that I find, despite the culture, and I want to talk about why this is important and why it's important to invest in this kind of creating a culture and this practice, because I think that's going to be important for managers who might be struggling with that in their organizations. But before we get to that, I want to talk about creating this culture is one thing. It's another for somebody to feel comfortable with saying, I need that consideration to be able to get up and go and not be penalized, right? Because we know that, if, yes, you're saying if you need to go, go, but then when it comes to that next promotion or when it comes to that next opportunity, that I'm not going to be considered because you're not going to forget that I have to leave from time to time. How do we communicate that and provide that trust that what we are providing as an organization and as managers in creating this infrastructure is going to be embodied by these people and believed.
Mhm. I think one of the things that we can do is look at the data. Almost 8 million Canadians over the age of 15 are caregivers. And that was from Stats Canada's research in 2018, before the pandemic, before our inflation rates. So I think, that combined with people living longer, the current economic reality, non-traditional, non-nuclear families may become more of a normal thing. And as we're living longer, a lot of us may be in the position of not only needing care, but having to have someone take care of us. I think the data is that most of us at some point are going to have to provide some level of care to another person. So it's not just a certain subset. This really is an issue that impacts everybody. So I think that's one thing that we can do to sort of start to show businesses why this is important and why they need to, look at it from a more holistic perspective. The second thing I would say is that as more employees look for holistic employers that walk their talk in terms of values, I think some will demand that. I mean, we've looked at the Great Resignation where people are reassessing who they want to work for. And I think it would, having that sensibility about this issue will help employers attract and retain really great candidates who are by their nature loyal, able to, deal with pressure, have to advocate for other people. So caregivers, we have a lot of skill sets that employers can leverage. And I think the more that they understand that and the fact that this is something that is going to impact most of us, that will help.
I think it's important. I think I talked to many, many employees in my HR role, and, they were struggling dealing with their manager because they had a situation, so I would sit down and take all those things and then maybe go to management and say, hey, could we maybe have a lunch and learn with the management team and talk to them about options? Like we learned a lot in the pandemic when all of a sudden a software manager had to go home, work from home, had 4 kids in the house and was trying to manage with 18 software people reporting to him. Like, I mean, there just isn't enough space in the day. And so we even allowed them to opt to see if they wanted to work a 30-hour week instead of a 37.5-hour. We gave them the option to say work from 11 till 7. And, and so that way, they're there, but we're just trying to make a balance between what they have as work responsibilities and what they have as home responsibilities. So as long as people say, hey, we're allowing a lot of flexibility here. If you need to pick a shift that's a little different, we're open to that. And, there wasn't a, hey, this is the reason why. It was just, hey, some people in this pandemic, require that. And I think the same thing can be done with people that require help with caregiving. Let's make it flexible and somehow adaptable for people to, maybe work a little bit later on maybe a couple of days a week if it has to be.
If I could just pick up on something that Kathryn said, Sam, she used the word flexibility, and I wanted to just draw attention to that because I think it's different than accommodation. And we can talk about our obligations under human rights legislation as accommodation, but that's a very different thing than flexibility and having the trust in your employee to get the work done when they need it without a formal accommodation process. So I just wanted to draw that distinction, and hopefully we can pick up on it later.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for me, that what you guys are saying makes a lot of sense, and Kathryn, that's very generous of your organization to, offer potentially a 30-hour work week to somebody in need as opposed to a 37.5-hour work week. But I got to play devil's advocate here because that, either managers or the people that the managers report to who are responsible for the business's bottom line are going to say automatically, well, hold on, I've just lost 7.5 hours of productivity from somebody that I'm paying for. At what point do I, as a business, say enough is enough? There's only so much accommodation that I can make or so much flexibility that I could provide. because I have a business to run. And so I think I want to talk about how do we sell this idea to show that the importance of making such accommodations available to our employees and what the net result of that is going to be and how it will offset potentially some of the more obvious perceived losses in terms of like physical hours that may not be work that are being paid for.
Yeah, I think what you realize is when you actually have those employees that have that pressure on them, they're probably not putting in a full week anyways. Their mind is not into the game if they're, fighting all the calls and everything else. And so they sometimes can sort of organize things so that they, maybe I'm going to focus on going to physio with my mom on Fridays from 9 till 12. So I'm not going to be at work, but they put their mind to, because the employer has been that flexible with them, I find them more committed to the job. They feel like, okay, I know I'm going to be off Friday mornings, but okay, maybe I'll work a little bit later Thursday if I have to. So it's just the flexibility to say you're still valued. We realize you have multiple priorities. And so we're just trying to show you that we're committed to you and you want to show us that you're committed to the company. And I think it's you'll get more effective employees, I think, sometimes by providing more flexibility. I think they're more committed versus trying to stay there and say, oh yeah, I've got, how am I going to do that, physio this week? I might have to take a half day vacation or something like that. So I think if the employer is adaptable to working with the situation, I think other employees around them also see that this employee is more at peace with themselves. They're able to handle the situation. So I think as an employer, I want my employees to feel valued and for their team around them to see that they're not stressed right to the hilt, that they're committed to the job. And, and it's like, sometimes they'll just say, look, so I'm going to be out of the office, but if you want to send me a text, I'll be happy to answer it. So they know they haven't really lost that person for the day, but we provided some, open opportunity for the person trying to make their work and life balance better.
And I guess I would take that all the way to the onboarding, right? So if employers are worried about employees who are going to be taking advantage of that kind of situation, then I back up to say, well, let's look at your recruiting practices then. And what are you doing from the moment of onboarding and constantly to make sure that you're tapping into that employee's engagement and not feeling like people are out to take advantage, right? Because I don't think, and again, I think this comes to the perception of caregiving. We're talking about people who are providing help to someone who has a loss of independence or has never had independence. So, this isn't, I just want to take a walk in the park kind of thing, right? Like, this is the emotional and physical and financial toll that comes with caregiving is a big deal. And so, I just think managers and people in positions of decision making, the more they understand that, hopefully the more empathetic they'll be.
I think that's true because they if they get treated like that and they have an employee now that comes to them, they have their eyes open a little bit to say, now the employer was really good to me and I benefit from this. Maybe I could help this employee. So it actually filters down. If you treat people correctly, they learn to be better employees and better managers.
Well, and I think to like most employers, you're in some way, you don't just employ the one person, but your brand as a company and organization are impacted by how that person talks to their family and friends about you. So, it has a bottom line on how we decide to spend our dollars and who we provide patronage to. So it's not just the employee. Like, I think the more you can look at it holistically as an employer, the better off you'll be.
Easier said than done. Again,
True.
I'm playing a little bit of devil's advocate here. But I think the reality is that a lot of organizations that are so pressed on, thin margins and declining sales and the challenges that we've all been facing as a result of the pandemic. Not all businesses have been negatively affected because of the pandemic, but a good number of them have. And so this laser-like focus, especially with the economy in the tank right now, and inflation and interest rates going up and all this. There is some serious downward pressure on businesses, and so cutting hours and is really what a lot of people are looking at doing, or how do we get more out of the fewer people that we have or that we can afford. And now we're telling them to allow these people to potentially work less hours. One of the things that I find is important is to not just talk about the branding, the positive PR that comes out of that. We need to show the powers that be the numbers, that an employee who is physically, emotionally, mentally more relaxed and able to do the work on their time, whether that's a shortened time or just different hours of the day, will actually generate a greater bottom line for you than otherwise, right? Better retention, you know what I mean? The impact that this has on the retention of employees. We all know the cost of having to find it and acquire and train new employees. What are some of the numbers or some of the statistics or experiences that each of you have had that can sort of help our audience, sell this concept and these policies to their employers?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, like we have a lot of software teams in the agile environment where there's deadlines every 2 weeks. And so there's very much review of what's been accomplished in that time frame. So maybe that employee only worked 30 hours, but has the best success in getting the, part of the project done. So I think if you can sort of focus on the team, getting the agile team meeting every 2 weeks and say, yeah, our team got this done. Irrelevant that one person might have worked 30 hours, one person might have worked 75. It's a team event. So I think that's where, as an employer, you sort of have to take the focus off the one individual, and as part of a team, how is it, as long as the team that they work for is comfortable with the situation, and that's up to the manager to make note that, not everybody's going to be working exactly the same hours. Some people work, 75 hours in a week. Some people work 30. You can't really tell. But if your project is evaluated on a regular basis, and if you start to see the project is offline and et cetera, then maybe you'll go deeper into, what's falling offline. But I think it's important for the employer, get the project done, get it done well, and, be focused on your bottom line, but not necessarily focus too much on how much every individual, is exactly making in their contribution. I mean, it's like, working for Laura Seacourts and you get how many scoops of ice cream. At the end of the day, as long as you're profitable, you're not counting how many scoops Mary scooped and how many scoops, Paul scooped. I think it's important to say you had a successful day. So I think you have to take a higher look at things rather than getting too caught in the weeds, because I think that's the biggest problem sometimes is you get down there looking to see who got caught in the weeds. And I mean, as I said to my daughter recently, she started a new job and she's just in the learning mode, and, something went wrong. And I said, Sydney, something's always going to go wrong. And I said, I think the biggest lesson you can learn is that you have to take what went wrong, look at how what caused it to go wrong, but get back on the bandwagon and keep moving forward. I mean, I told her a story one time when one of my payroll staff post-dated the payroll by a month. Let me know that I learned the fast lesson to check that date first now. But that's part of, as an employer, is everybody wants the company to succeed. So, being as adaptable as you can or as flexible as you can, and focusing that the project is on time and that it's successful, software release, then, it's a positive for the whole company.
Wanda, the anecdotal or evidence-based proof that, focusing on human capital management as a practice benefits the organization. There are legal obligations that businesses have in these types of situations. Can you talk a little bit about, here in Canada, what are employers facing and what should they know when it comes to supporting caregivers in the organization?
Yeah, well, whether you're a federally or provincially regulated employer, all of our legislation has some human rights obligations that you as an employer have to be aware of. And accommodation based on family status is one of those things. And it's, narrowly defined. It doesn't necessarily expand to friends that may provide caregiving, but that's sort of the floor, is the accommodation to the point of undue hardship. But, as we've been discussing, that's where I think flexibility can be a little bit different than the accommodation obligation. As well, you know, you have some assistance from the government, like there's compassionate care leave, and there's some, but that's not necessarily sufficient to help employees from day to day. So I'm hoping that, you know, as a result of these conversations and education about this issue, that more employers will look more creatively at ways that we can help employees beyond just the accommodation, because sometimes even that process can be rife with interpersonal dynamics, and it can be quite challenging.
I suspect there's probably going to be a lot of confusion out there about that difference between accommodation and flexibility. Can you delve into that a little bit? Give us like an example.
Yeah, so accommodation might say that if I'm asking for an accommodation from my employer, then they may ask for information about why, and they're going to look at the definition of who is family. So if it wasn't my mother and it was, you know, somebody not like my brother, they may not have to provide me that flexibility. So when I say flexibility, I'm talking about that trust in your employee to say, even for parents, like, and this gets into preferences versus needs. You know, you want to take your child to a soccer game once in a while. That's flexibility, that your employer allows you to manage your time and your projects, to what Kathryn was saying, that it's about getting the work done, not where, when, and how so much, but giving you that trust and flexibility to work around your needs and schedule. So it's a different look than accommodation, where it's, you know, kind of a rigid process, where most organizations you'd have to write it and it either go to your manager or HR, and you may have to have a meeting with your union. You know, it's not flexibility.
Yeah.
It's asking for, it's a big burden on most employees, and a lot of people just decide not to, and they try to, you know, juggle. But as we know, it's an intense situation that can lead to burnout and doesn't allow either the employee or the employer to get the best from that person. So being flexible is a win-win.
No, I agree. I've even, you know, in dealing with employees, we had introduced a new healthcare spending account. And I mean, we even looked into options to see, you know, if someone had an elderly mother living at their house, could they use the healthcare spending account? And in some circumstances, we're able to find out there is ways to use it, but you have to meet certain CRA requirements, et cetera. But at least we, you know, went to the trouble of asking that question. And in some cases it worked out, you know, and then the employee was saying, well, great, Kathy, I appreciate that you took the time to help me look into this, and it helped me out. So I think there's, you know, as an employer, if you know, I've learned that. So I've got the next employee showing up at my office. I go, okay, look into this one. You know, like I said, I can never guarantee what CRA is going to do, but, you know, it's worth, you know, at least working that path. And I mean, I even went to the trouble of taking the time to write down my sort of pathway when I put my mom in a long-term care home. Because I mean, a number of people come into my office and they say, you know, oh, I've got my mother and she's not doing well. And I'm going, you know what? I've probably talking to 15 people in the same boat. And so I made a little sheet that said, here's my tips that everybody's given me, you know? And so it was just sort of a learning curve. But I thought, you know, how many times I'm going to give the same story and not share the information? So, and I even offered to have like a lunch and learn, you know, long-term care, you know, learning the pathway. And there's like
That's
20
great.
people in the company saying, when's that seminar? I'll be there, you know, because everybody's facing these same things in your lifetime. And we were all going to be, you know, going down that path. And if you learn, like, you know, for example, in long-term care applications, you know, I suggest putting down 3 or 5 homes. And then if it comes up and your mother or father is not ready to go, you can turn that down, but then you don't end up off the list and waiting 3 months. So, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes life's lessons you learn are best shared with your friends and family and maybe your employees, because you don't want them going down the same path of putting one, you know, home on the list, and then all of a sudden they're waiting 3 months to get back on the list. So it's just like something that, you know, maybe it was on page 14 of the little notes, but, you know, some little tip like that could really save people a lot.
I think that's really novel, Kathryn, and it's funny because, with EAP and lunch and learns, I've been around organizations where they're comfortable talking about setting up your RESP for your child, or, how to juggle parenting with work life. But when it comes to caregiving, it doesn't get the same attention, and it's a very different struggle. So things like long-term care insurance, ERG groups for employees. Those are things that employers can do to help kind of assist their workforce in grappling with these issues.
That's interesting. I love this conversation because it really does highlight how, regardless of how advanced we think we are sometimes as an organization and our empathy towards our employees, and the pandemic has forced all of us that weren't already either on hybrid work environments or offering this type of flexibility to really look at it. This conversation for me really highlights another area that we have not been putting enough focus on, and that we might be missing an opportunity for acquisition, right? I'm in the process of hiring right now, and we look at how many people are out there, how difficult it is to hire despite the number of people that are out there, and getting that right fit. And by not having these policies, or by being rigid about maybe discriminating against people who might need such accommodation, we're losing out on potentially a better employee that could be more effective in whatever the hours or whatever the conditions are that they work in. So I think for me, this goes well beyond the legal needs or even moral needs to support an employee. It really does look to the bottom line of the business and its success by increasing your pool from which you can acquire top quality talent. Because there's no question that there are some people that can do a better job in 30 hours than the average person can do in 40. Right? I think we've all known those people.
I know I read something in the paper this morning about in the US, they were talking about maternity leaves and talking about, this company's going to give us 8 weeks. And I'm thinking here in Canada, we're giving 18 months now. And the balance is so, strange when you hear that, I feel sorry for the parents having kids when they get 8 weeks off and they're expected back in the office, So I think in any situation as an employer, you've got to look with a wider eye sort of thing in terms of, making your company have a good profile. Because right now the market with, interviews, there's so many employees or potential employees having multiple offers, So if you think that employer is a great employee to get, you want to be able to sell to them the company that has more dynamic, vision of the world sort of thing, rather than, we got an assembly line and there's 10 people on that assembly line and, nobody can ever move off the line. So I think it's important to be, well respected by your employees and listen to them, listen to where their concerns are, and try and come up with some type of adaptable platform, whether it be in benefits, whether it be in time off, whether it be flexibility. I think it's most important to say, it's important for all of us to work together for a successful company.
Yeah.
So let me, we're coming up on, I think, a natural conclusion in our timing here for this conversation. So I'd like to give each one of you the opportunity to maybe put out one final thought on this subject that you would like everybody to consider when they go back to their desks and talking to their internal teams. I'll start with you, Wanda.
Wow, that's a tough question. There's so much, but I guess one thing I would like for people to remember is that, caregiving is different than parenting. And it's a very emotional, sort of stressful, that doesn't have the same challenges that parenting. I'm a parent too, so I get that parenting's hard, but just to have empathy in terms of what people might be going through in terms of caregiving for a loved one that doesn't have independence.
Yeah, I think it's almost like you want that person, whether they be the president of the company, to think about, if I was in your shoes, if I was that employee with that employee situation, what would I want an employee to do for me? I think that's the view you want them to look at. It's like, you're looking for the company view, but you're also wanting them to appreciate, if, they had the same shoes on as you do right now, how would they want somebody to treat them? Or how would they want someone to help them?
I agree. And I appreciate you guys trying to condense like a final thoughts into a couple of sentences. I know this is a huge and evolving topic, which is why we have the 17th floor, quite frankly, and why we do this. I would love to invite both of you back for a follow-up on this based on some of the reactions and comments and questions that we get here on the 17th floor. So for those of you watching this, please feel free to comment down below so that we can carry on this conversation and invite Wanda and Kathryn and potentially others back for follow-up on implementing the practices and the ideas and the policy changes and the cultural changes that we've talked about. How have you, if you have experienced this challenge in having to sell such policy changes and shifts in your organization, what were some of the obstacles you faced? And how did you overcome those obstacles? Let's learn from each other on the growing practice of human capital management here on the 17th floor. Please check the details below where you can find Wanda's information if you would like to reach out to her direct, be it for consultations or further conversation. I'm sure if I'm speaking on your behalf, Wanda, but I'm sure you're open to those
Sure.
opportunities as a business person as well.
Yes, thank you.
And then look up Wanda here on the 17th floor. Look in the member directory or the Board of Advisors directory. You'll find her there. Please feel free to reach out and ask any questions. She's been an incredible mentor in our community. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And remember, we're here every 2 weeks live. Just go in under our community and networking, live networking events, and take a look at what's coming up in the next few weeks. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day.